Pat Condell is clearly the comedian he claims to be. When his video is good to be anti-Islam, he cannot possibly be talking about actual Islam, but about a caricature thereof. Now, I'm not denying that said caricature exists to some extent in the form of extremists. That goes for every single form of ideology in this world. It talks about the importance of a secular society, but the grandeur of a secular society is to have the mechanisms to allow space for anyone's system of beliefs, as long as not mattering the belief, one always acts within the law. Our Condell's argument is that most of Islam's doctrine falls outside the law, especially if taken to the letter and put into practice. But the same goes for any Abrahamic religion, or most ancient religions for that matter. Mr. Condell may argue that modern cases of religious fanaticism are unheard of among other religions, but that is just the result of a media bias along with selective ignorance. Every idea, be it religious or not, is susceptible of being taken to the extreme by crazy individuals, and if said extreme goes as far as to break the law, then the responsibility should be individual, not collective. Judging a group of 2.5 million people living peacefully under the law for the acts of a few hundreds of them is nothing short of prejudice. He says Islam values are opposed to his, but in a perfect secular society there would still be opposed values to his. Leftist values, multicultural values, feminist values, and so on and so forth. I, for one, do not agree with the values of the so-called chaff community who traditionally support political parties such as BNP, ADL, and only recently UKIP. Yet I respect their system of belief, as long as they abide by law. There's nothing wrong about disagreeing with other people's ideas. There's something fundamentally wrong about singling out and pigeonholing an entire community by using a different set of standards than the one used to measure other similar communities. In fact, I would agree with most of Condell's complaints if he applied those to all the communities in the UK without exception, because most of his complaints are not about Islam, but about the worst side of human condition. Separatism, supremacism, social intolerance, victimism, misogyny, homophobia, intimidation, censorship, and constant threats of violence over social issues. All those things could easily apply to BNP voters or to Jewish far-righters without distinction. On a side note, genital mutilation is actively practiced within Judaism as well. Mr. Condell is not interested in the whole truth, but the truth that best suits his agenda. Same as when he argues against halal food while showing kosher in good light, by using this word as a synonym of good, when its slaughtering practices, kosher slaughtering practices, are most similar to those of halal. In fact, halal is clearly inspired by kosher. So while I agree that all these things should be best removed from the framework of a modern society, I do not agree, however, this removal should be one-sided, as Mr. Condell seems to suggest. Incidentally, as I was recording this video, I read a news about a UKIP councillor who had been suspended after only 5 days, pending an investigation for alleged tweets that he made about poofs, dykes and packies. And this is a textual sake errat scripting. How convenient this would be, I said to myself, if I wanted to ridicule and discredit an entire group of human beings such as the UKIP, solely based on the radical views of one of them. But upon further reflection I realized that the real news was not in the comments, for which this individual has not been suspended, but the fact apparently this took place back in February 2013. Therefore the news is it took almost a year and a half for the UKIP to do something about it, and it was only after the individual obtained his seat for the party that the disciplinary action began. Well, how convenient is that? The party gets to keep the seat won by a chap with such interesting ideas that, had they acted more swiftly, he probably wouldn't have won in the first place. So how democratic is that? It certainly raises the question as to who won the seat, his radical ideas of poofs, dykes and packies, the UKIP, or both. But I am digressing. Back to Condell, he talks about injustice, violence, oppression and other terrible things under Islamic rule. But there are some interesting facts about his view on the matter that he forgets to mention. Iraq was a fairly secular country, yet a war was declared against it, has taken the lives of between 150,000 and 1 million people. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, is a country ruled by a system based on the Sharia, but it's not a hindrance for them to become allies of those who waged war in Iraq. There are other similar countries to Saudi Arabia that are also allies, such as Kuwait, and so on and so forth. We have also the case of Syria, which was also a fairly secular country with several religions coexisting in peace until the same coalition who declared war against Iraq decided to infiltrate the country with international groups of Salafist, jihadist or mercenaries, whatever you want to call them. Then Mr. Condell goes on about the historic negative influence of Islam. He forgets that if not thanks to Islam, most of the Greek works would have not been preserved, because they translated them, obviously, thus delaying Western progress by thousands of years. Mr. Condell is nothing short of a comedian and a very dishonest pretext for a human being. His psychological warfare tactics target both the skeptic community and the uncritic and thinking bulk of the far right in Britain, and I do not believe this to be by chance. There is a connection between the orchestrated campaign that brought down the BNP. At the same time, it empowered the EDL, and in turn this was followed by the posterior demolition of the EDL and the rise of the UKIP, transferring, and I quote, quality votes from the far right to the UKIP while cleaning anti-Semitic chaff in the process.